History didn't begin with truth. It began with stories. Stories whispered by kings, preached by scholars, and carved by conquerors who wanted to be remembered a certain way. But what if the foundations of civilization, the facts we were raised to believe, were built on centuries of misunderstanding and deliberate deceit? Let's start where it all began, with the world itself. For thousands of years, people believed the earth was flat, a giant pancake floating in space. But here's the twist. Educated people in ancient Greece and Rome already knew it was round. It wasn't until the Middle Ages, when church authorities and poor communication twisted old writings, that the flat earth myth resurfaced. So when modern textbooks say people thought Columbus would fall off the edge, that's a lie. Columbus didn't fear falling off the world. He just miscalculated how big it actually was. The flat earth belief was an invention of later historians trying to make the past look dumber than it was. Picture Napoleon, tiny, angry, standing on a stool to look his generals in the eye. That image was pure British propaganda. Napoleon Bonaparte was actually 5'6" to 5'7", perfectly average for his time. The confusion came from the difference between French and British measuring systems, and a clever campaign by his enemies to make him seem like a little man with big ambitions. Even after centuries, that lie survived because it felt right. The psychology of it, a small man conquering Europe, made for a perfect story. When you imagine a Viking, you probably see a barbarian with a horned helmet charging into battle. But here's the truth. No real Viking ever wore horns. That image came from 19th century opera costumes, especially Wagner's Ring Cycle, where costume designers added horns for dramatic effect. Archaeologists have never found a single Viking helmet with horns. The real Vikings were practical sailors and traders, not costume villains from a fantasy play. It's the most popular inspirational myth in the world that Albert Einstein failed mathematics. But it's completely false. Einstein excelled in math from a young age. The confusion came from a reversed grading scale in his school system. 5 was the best mark, not the worst. The real Einstein didn't fail math. We failed to read his report card correctly. Hollywood painted Cleopatra as the last great Egyptian queen, a symbol of Egypt's glory. But the truth is shocking. Cleopatra was Greek, descended from the Macedonian Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great's conquest. She ruled Egypt, yes, but she spoke Greek as her first language. Her beauty, intelligence, and political mastery were real. But her Egyptian bloodline was another myth that history's storytellers conveniently ignored. Every nation has its heroes, its victories, and its convenient lies. Stories written not to record truth, but to inspire obedience. These weren't harmless myths. They were tools to shape identity, loyalty, and pride. Because sometimes the only way to build a nation is to rewrite its past. The tale goes like this. A young George Washington chops down a cherry tree, and when confronted, he nobly declares, "I cannot tell a lie." Touching, right? Except it never happened. The story was invented by Mason Locke Weems, one of Washington's early biographers. He needed to sell more books, and what better way than to turn the first U.S. president into a symbol of pure honesty? The cherry tree story became national gospel, taught to generations of children as moral truth. In reality, Washington was honest, yes, but not saintly. The myth was crafted to sell a man as a legend, Christopher Columbus, hero of the high seas, discoverer of the New World. That's what the textbooks said. But he didn't discover anything. When Columbus arrived in 1492, the Americas were already home to tens of millions of people, thriving civilizations like the Maya, Aztec, and Taino. He didn't find an empty land. he invaded one. And yet, through centuries of rewriting, the massacre became a voyage of discovery. His myth endures not because it's true, but because it was politically useful to make it true. The story of the Trojan horse, Greek soldiers hidden inside a wooden horse that fooled the Trojans and ended the war, is one of history's oldest brilliant tactics. But what if it never happened? Many historians now believe the Trojan horse was a metaphor, a poetic symbol for a military deception, not an actual sculpture rolled through city gates. But that didn't stop centuries of art, poetry, and films from turning it into a historical fact. The line between story and history blurred, and the myth galloped into eternity. In 1692, hundreds were accused of witchcraft in Salem. The official story says it was God's justice against the devil's followers. The truth? It was mass panic, greed, and social revenge. Many witches were simply people who owned land, challenged authority, or didn't fit into Puritan ideals. They were executed to keep others quiet. History later reframed the madness as a religious moral event, sanitizing what was, in truth, political murder. When the starving people of France cried for bread, the Queen supposedly sneered, "Let them eat cake. It's the ultimate symbol of royal arrogance." But guess what? There's no record she ever said it. The line appeared in a book written years before she was even queen. It was propaganda, an easy lie to ignite revolution. She was guilty of excess, yes, but not of those exact words. History just needed a villain. Empires weren't just built on stone and steel, they were built on lies. Lies that made ordinary men into gods, and brutal conquerors into pioneers. And as we move forward, those deceptions don't fade. They evolve. Because when religion and power collide, truth is the first casualty. Religion, the oldest institution of belief and control. For thousands of years, it's been a source of comfort and a weapon of manipulation. Because sometimes the divine truth wasn't written by gods. It was edited by kings. The apple in the Garden of Eden, you know the story. Eve eats the forbidden apple, and humankind is doomed. Except, the Bible never says apple. The original Hebrew word, peri, simply means fruit. It could have been a fig, a pomegranate, or something entirely symbolic. But when Latin translators chose the word malum, which means both apple and evil, the myth was born. A linguistic accident turned one fruit into a cosmic symbol of sin, and for centuries women were blamed for humanity's fall because of a translation error. The three wise men, or three misunderstandings. Every Christmas nativity shows three wise men bringing gifts to baby Jesus, but the Bible never says there were three. It only mentions wise men from the east. No number, no names. The three came from the three gifts they carried: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Over time, artists filled in the blanks, assigning them names, races, and crowns. A symbolic visit became a multicultural fairy tale, one that never actually happened as we imagine it. The Flat Earth Church. Myth, we've all heard it, that the medieval church believed the earth was flat, and brave explorers proved them wrong. Total nonsense. By the 4th century BCE, Greek scholars like Eratosthenes had already calculated Earth's circumference. Most medieval Christians knew it was round. The flat Earth idea was a 19th century invention, created by writers mocking religion as anti-science. Ironically, the myth about their ignorance became one of history's smartest lies. The Shroud of Turin, divine or deceptive? The famous Shroud of Turin, said to bear the image of Christ, has been worshipped for centuries. But multiple carbon dating tests place the cloth's origin in the Middle Ages, over 1,000 years after Jesus' death. Still, believers cling to it, museums profit from it, and faith fuels its aura. Because sometimes, the truth threatens more than it heals. The Holy Crusades, or sanctioned bloodshed, the Crusades were told as holy missions, Christians reclaiming sacred lands. In reality, they were power-hungry wars backed by propaganda and greed. Popes promised salvation for slaughter, kings saw conquest disguised as faith. Millions died believing they were defending God, when they were fueling empires. The lie was holy, and therefore untouchable. Transition scene, stained glass cracks, revealing images of maps, gold coins, and battlefields. Narration. Faith was the perfect disguise, a velvet glove over an iron fist. But the manipulation didn't stop in temples and palaces. Next, we'll dive into how science, education, and even discoveries were twisted, not to reveal truth, but to control what truth meant. We like to believe that science is immune to lies. Equations don't lie, data doesn't deceive, but the people who interpret them do. Because throughout history, many of our scientific facts were shaped not by discovery, but by ego, competition, and control. For nearly 1,500 years, scholars swore that the sun revolved around the earth. The Ptolemaic model was treated as cosmic truth, not because it was proven, but because it fit theology. When Copernicus and Galileo challenged it, they weren't just questioning astronomy, they were threatening the Church's cosmic order. It took centuries before the truth that Earth orbits the sun was accepted. A perfect example of how pride slowed down progress. In 1912, scientists unveiled the Piltdown Man, claiming it was the evolutionary bridge between apes and humans. It was hailed as the discovery of the century, except it was fake. A human skull, an orangutan jaw, and a set of filed-down teeth, carefully buried together. The hoax lasted 40 years before being exposed. It wasn't science's failure of logic. It was science's failure of humility. We wanted proof of evolution so badly that we accepted a lie dressed in bones. For decades, kids loved the mighty Brontosaurus, the gentle, long-necked dinosaur of textbooks and toys. But scientists accidentally named the same species twice. When paleontologists rushed discoveries in the 1800s bone wars, they mixed skeletons and mislabeled fossils. By 1903, experts admitted Brontosaurus was actually an Apatosaurus, but the public loved Brontosaurus too much to let it die. And so a non-existent dinosaur became a legend. For centuries, doctors drained blood to balance the humors. Kings, generals, and peasants alike trusted this deadly remedy. It killed George Washington and countless others, all in the name of medicine. It took 2,000 years for doctors to accept that germs, not blood balance, cause disease. Science can be brutal, especially when it refuses to evolve. Ironically, not all lies come from authority. Some come against it. In 1969, mankind walked on the moon. But within years, conspiracy theories flooded the world. It was filmed in a studio. Despite mountains of evidence, moon rocks, telemetry data, mirrors left on the surface, the myth survived. Because it's easier for people to distrust truth than to admit human greatness might actually be real. Science gave us knowledge, but also illusion. History's smartest minds weren't always honest. And next, we uncover how politics and empires weaponized those lies to rewrite reality itself. Power doesn't just rule through weapons or money. It rules through stories, the ones it tells and the ones it forbids you to question. Across history, the most dangerous lies weren't whispered in shadows, they were broadcast through microphones, carved in stone, and printed in textbooks. The ancient Greeks pretended to surrender to the city of Troy, leaving behind a gift, a massive wooden horse. The Trojans celebrated, brought it inside their walls, and sealed their fate. Inside the horse were Greek soldiers who destroyed the city from within. It's unclear if the story is myth or history, but its lesson is eternal. Never trust a gift from your enemies, especially one wrapped in flattery. Rome loved to call itself a bringer of peace, Pax Romana. But that peace came at the cost of annihilated tribes, enslaved nations, and silenced cultures. Rome didn't spread civilization. It spread Roman control. Peace was simply what the victors called the quiet left after everyone else had died. When Rome burned in 64 AD, rumors spread that Emperor Nero played his lyre while watching the flames. Whether or not that's true, Nero blamed the Christians, a small, unpopular group, and began one of history's earliest propaganda-fueled persecutions. He turned public anger into political power. It's a tactic leaders would copy for centuries. When in doubt, invent a scapegoat. For centuries, monarchs across Europe ruled with divine right, claiming God himself chose them. This single lie justified genocide, colonization, and tyranny. If you questioned the king, you questioned God. It took revolutions, guillotines, and centuries of rebellion to finally unmask that illusion of holy authority. Even in modern history, lies still ignite wars. From fabricated documents to edited satellite images, nations have spun tales of threats to justify invasion. In 2003, global powers claimed they had proof of weapons of mass destruction, proof that never existed. The result? Decades of chaos, millions displaced, and another generation raised in mistrust. Propaganda may evolve, but its purpose never changes. Control through confusion. Empires, kings, generals, all masters of illusion. But sometimes the lies weren't about war or glory. They were about faith. Because when religion embraced deception, it didn't just shape nations. It rewrote eternity. Faith is humanity's oldest light. But through history, even that light has been dimmed by greed, fear, and power. The line between belief and manipulation blurred long ago, leaving behind sacred lies that shaped empires and souls. 6. The donation of Constantine, the forged gift of empire for nearly 1,000 years. The Catholic Church ruled with a document called the Donation of Constantine, a decree claiming that the Roman Emperor Constantine had given the Pope control of the Western Empire. It justified wars, land seizures, and immense power. Only in the 15th century did scholars prove it was a forgery. Fake Latin, fake signatures, fake history. But by then, the lie had already rewritten Europe. Indulgences, selling tickets to heaven in the Middle Ages. The Church claimed people could buy forgiveness through indulgences, payments that supposedly erased sin. The poor sold their homes. The rich bought salvation. It was this corruption that drove Martin Luther to rebel, sparking the Protestant Reformation. Imagine, one of the world's biggest religious shifts, triggered by a receipt for redemption. The Crusades, holy wars. Fueled by politics, the Crusades were sold as divine missions, God's will to reclaim the Holy Land. In truth, many were wars of profit and power. Armies looted, massacred, and enslaved in the name of faith. Knights who believed they were earning heaven often left behind cities burning in blood and gold. Religion was the banner. Conquest was the goal. Witch hunts, the fear that burned innocence. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, over 50,000 people, mostly women, were executed as witches. Superstition replaced science. Fear replaced reason. Priests and inquisitors twisted belief into paranoia. It was a genocide born not of demons, but of delusion. Every scream was proof of how belief, when weaponized, becomes the darkest kind of lie. God wills it, the eternal excuse across every faith. Leaders have used one phrase to silence dissent. God wills it. It's the ultimate shield against truth, a justification for cruelty, conquest, and censorship. From ancient sacrifices to modern extremism, those words have echoed for millennia, not as a reflection of God, but as a mirror of man's hunger for control. Closing scene, montage of crumbling temples, statues turning to dust, and stars rising over silent ruins. Narration. The past isn't just a record of what happened. It's a reminder of what we were told to believe. Empires lied, scholars lied, even saints lied, but every lie leaves behind a shadow. And in that shadow, truth still waits to be rediscovered. Final voice. Slow. Cinematic outro tone. If this video opened your eyes to how deep deception runs in history, don't let it end here. Question everything. Even the stories carved in stone. Because only when we stop believing the lies can we finally start learning the truth.